On behalf of Buzzy's family, I'd like to thank all of you, his family members, those who played with him, those who were coached by him, and those who had the privilege of being his friend, for being here with us this day. When we go downstairs after Mass, there's a beautiful luncheon prepared, and then there'll be a chance for the family to share some great memories of his baseball days. But I wanted to take this opportunity while we were in the church to just reflect a little bit upon why we're starting here. Buzzy was given the gift of baptism as a young man by his family and was given a gift of faith. Now, whether we live that faith or not, it is still given to us as a child and goes throughout our lives. So we just have us reflect that one of the great gifts of baseball, as compared to soccer or football or basketball, is that it doesn't have a time clock. It has innings. As long as you can keep somehow either a walk or a hit, it doesn't end. But even in baseball, there comes the bottom of the ninth inning. And unless somehow you make a tie, the game finally ends. In our own lives here on earth, it's far more similar to baseball than those other sports. There isn't a time clock when we're born. We don't know how long exactly it will last. And some of us are able to string together a whole bunch of walks, a whole bunch of hits, and keep it going. And sometimes we die earlier than others. But I wanted to share another baseball great who's also in the National Semi-Pro Baseball Hall of Fame with Buzzy, from Babe Ruth, who famously played baseball, famously made mistakes, but famously came back to his Catholic faith. He talks about when he was a young man, "I doubt if any appeal could have straightened me out except a power above man, the appeal of God. Iron rod discipline couldn't have done it, nor all the punishment and reward systems that I could have been devised. God had an eye out for me, just as God has an eye out for you. He was pulling for me to make the grade." What Babe Ruth realized is that even when he was having this incredible career and making his mistakes, is that God had an eye for him. As I thought of this, I know that so many of you who are players here recognize that Buzzy had an eye for you. That as he coached, as he watched you, that he was willing, even though he was a pitcher, to go to bat for any player who was there, who showed the willingness to work, that he was willing to have their back and go to bat for them. I not only realized that God was just but merciful. He knows that we are weak and that we all found it easier to be stinkers rather than good sons of God, not only as kids, but even as we become grown men. What Babe recognized, and I think hopefully all of us recognize, is that we can be stinkers. That at times we are not the best that we can be. But what Babe Ruth recognized, and I hope that Buzzy knew, is that God is merciful. That we must only go to him and say, "I'm sorry. I messed up. I wasn't right." The other thing is, so for us as Catholics, we're supposed to come to Mass every Sunday. Now, there are some who don't always make it here, and my hope is that this will always be an invitation to come home. Babe Ruth found himself in this situation, and he would often kneel down just in front of a window in New York City at the night before a game, and he would say, "I would feel quite humble I'd ask God to help me not make such a fool of myself and pray that I would measure up to what he expected of me. This beautiful idea to recognize for all of us that God is present. He tells us himself that where two or more are gathered in my name, there am I in their midst. He tells us as well that any that come to me, I will not reject them. And even as the gospel reading that we have today, that we have so clearly, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. He was waiting for Babe Ruth to kneel down in a hotel room to turn to him. Our Lord was waiting for Buzzy at any moment to turn to him and say, Lord, I hand my spirit over to you, even in the last moment. And for all of us who gather here, he's really waiting for the same thing. For you and I to have the courage to say, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. At the end of Babe's life, he had cancer, and he said he would finally go to confession. As I lay in that bed that evening, I thought to myself, what a comforting feeling to be free from worries. I could certainly now turn them all over to God. What happens is in the first 8.5 innings of life, there's a lot of decisions that you and I can make. There's a lot of positions that we can change, and there's a lot of way to make up for mistakes that happened in the inning before. But eventually, when we get to the end of the 9th inning, Babe has a very good thought. At that point, we can only turn it over to God. In the end, the God who made you and me is the only one left. And he is the true umpire, the one who decides whether we're out or whether we're in. So we must turn to him with that gift. My final quote isn't from Babe Ruth, but from Lou Gehrig, whose own baseball career ended in great illness. And he says, very historically and famously, for the past 2 weeks you've been reading about the bad break I just got. But today, I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of the earth. I've been in ballparks for 17 years and have never received anything but kindness and encouragement from you fans. Buzzy spent far more than 17 years in ballparks. From the time he was 8 until our Lord called him home, that's at least 48 years in ballparks. So if you're counting, that's at least 3 times as many as Lou Gehrig. So if Lou Gehrig was the luckiest man alive, that would make Buzzy the luckiest man alive to have all those years. Let us rejoice in those years that he had. For the young players who are now getting older, where he made a difference in your life, I ask you to pray for his soul, but I ask you also to hand that gift on. There's another group of young boys coming up who need someone to take an interest in them. Babe Ruth, as many of you know, grew up in an orphanage. And it was only because of a brother Matthias, who saw him on the baseball field and recognized that he had potential, that he got a break. It would be those brothers who would negotiate with the Baltimore Orioles who would give him a chance to play. It was those brothers who loved him when he made mistakes that allowed him to come back and make it. So I'm just asking any of you who Buzzy helped along the way that you do the same for another. And while you may not coach them into the major leagues, you may not get them into any Hall of Fame. If you're willing to take the time, you can help make great men and women who are willing to live and love others. This day is the end of the 9th inning. But I hope for all of you that you realize the game isn't over. Christ is on the cross for you and me. And he wants all of us not to end life here when it's over. Instead, he wants to be us a champion for eternity. Find Christ. Let him be your coach. Let him be your manager. Let him show you how to play ball in this life. And if we do that, then we'll have life in the world to come.